Welcome to Voice Is, a podcast where we have conversations with people whose voices we love to delve into the good, the bad, and the messy of what makes your voice yours. I'm Casey Erin Clark.
And I'm Julie Fogg. We're co-founders of Vital Voice Training, a voice, public speaking, and communication coaching company out to change the conversation about what your voice is supposed to sound like.
Hi, everybody. I'm Casey Erin Clark, coming in from New York City.
I'm Julie Fogg, coming in from San Francisco, and we are shaking up our usual format for Voice Is for the month of January to bring you a three-part series on one of our favorite topics, executive presence. The fancy term for what leaders look and sound like is executive presence. If you've ever been in a situation where you've been told you didn't have it, that shameful moment, you may have been given a solution like, just sound more confident, or just be yourself, or even be told you don't have what it takes to be a leader, which is patently untrue. So in true VVT style, we're going to unpack this knot and we're going to lift up the hood, take a little bit of a glimpse underneath to look at some of the specific problems we've identified with this use of the term executive presence.
Problem number one. The definition of executive presence is nebulous, to say the least. You know it when you see it, or most often when you don't. But of course, who's doing the seeing is what matters here, because success is in the eye of the beholder. That beholder may hold incredible power over whether or not you advance in your career based solely on their impression of you. And they may never have examined why they believe what they believe that leaders look and sound like.
Problem number two, executive presence advice is either super general or wildly specific. We've all seen the articles and the books and the how-to guides, right? Like, be calm, cool, and collected. Well, according to whom?
And then there's the other side of the advice, this pinpoint precise checklist kind. This kind of wildly specific advice might be easier to learn, but listen up, friends. Attempting to follow this kind of advice most often results in crippling self-consciousness.
Problem number three, both definition and advice are context-free. They ignore both who you are and the situations that you exist in, and they ignore how the same actions and attitudes and gestures on two very different people will be perceived differently, even in the same situations. And they ignore that someone may follow every piece of executive presence advice they can get their hand on to the letter, but the decision maker in the room may not receive it well. That means for most of us, this advice carries with it inherent contradictions and impossible double binds, and very little of this advice allows for the complexity of being a human around other humans.
And here's the thing. Executive presence is not the same thing as leadership. Executive presence is a costume. And for so many people, it's a costume that doesn't fit very well because it's based on this murky sea of bias and old-fashioned standards of what leadership is supposed to look and sound like. So we're going to break down the components of this executive presence costume to see how much of it is actually achievable and how much of it actually has to do with the role of leader. We've put this plethora of advice into three categories: polish, poise, and power. And over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be breaking those down for you. We're going to be digging in, we're going to be looking at the problems, and we're going to be giving you some new tools to do this in a new, fresh way that feels a little bit more like you. Because here at Vital Voice Training, we are all about expanding the definition and changing the conversation about what leaders look and sound like. So on our last episode, we spent some time digging into the idea of polish, which for us, we're talking about how you look, how you speak, and how you act in different scenarios as it relates to executive presence. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about our second P, poise, which for us is how we react. So with that in mind as kind of a large umbrella to represent poise, Julie, what does the word poise make you think of?
I mean, so much at this point because we've been having these discussions for a while. But I think my story as a human was, we've talked about it in other podcasts or whatnot, just, because the way I was raised, being in Seattle, there's a little bit of the Seattle freeze. There's a little bit of this like head down power through. There's this like, we can make it through anything, but like full on physical turtling. You don't show what you're thinking. Like the core value is keep your own counsel. So I remember going out into the real world and constantly being complimented on my poise, which was confusing to me because I didn't understand what I was doing that was poised. And it turns out it was that I had the absence of strong emotions and a lot of physical tension, that I had gone from keeping it like this to like being in like full on like ironclad ballerina. So I'd walk through the world, people probably without knowing what else to say would say, "You're so poised." And I think that experience of it really inspired our exploration of it. So that's really what I come from when I'm thinking about poise and how that interacts with the real world. And I'm so, what about you? We've had so many conversations and something new always comes out in them.
Oh man, I think of a lot of things too. One of the things that I think about is a couple of summers of doing summer stock theater, living with, for some reason, they were both from Alabama beauty queens, like pageant girls. And so in addition to this sort of pageant girl style of poise that was married with the musical theater girl style of poise, which is a whole other thing we could talk about, they were Southern. They were Alabamian, I guess we could say. And so there was an ability to do the bless her heart kind of thing, where you were saying the very polite thing with the very polite tone of voice and the beautiful smile on your face. But underneath that, you could be thinking the meanest things about this woman that anyone has ever thought under the sun. You could absolutely hate that bitch, but no one would know. It was like the surface level of it, and then what was happening underneath that. Yeah, I think of that. And then I think of the Midwestern version of that, which is we don't talk about hard things. We don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable, which is almost like an active maintaining of the collective poise, which is really interesting. So we've got the Seattle version, we've got the Southern version, we've got the Midwestern version. Poise shows up differently in all kinds of locations, but in the world of executive presence, I want to start by kind of giving the big 3 bullet points that we came to that represent it overall, which was in the same way that polish was looking the way we expect you to look, speaking the way we expect you to speak, and acting the way we expect you to act. Poise is showing what we expect you to show, which would be warmth or gravitas or decisiveness, not showing what we expect you to hide, which would be control over negative emotions or your response to conflict, control over fear and over discomfort, and then control over uncertainty, which is always knowing the answer, or if you don't, being able to meaningfully fake it. And that came out of this quote that we found. So Julie, I want you to read this quote for everybody so they can hear where we came up with this.
This quote is what started it all. We had some suspicions, and then when somebody just puts it in writing and you realize, oh yeah. So this quote: "A person with good executive presence never lets people see her sweat. She's not harried running from meeting to meeting. She's not flustered when she speaks. And she seems like the person who, even in the wake of crisis in the middle of the night, could still show up looking put together. Be calm, collected, and the person with all the answers, and you'll be seen as a leader." Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things that really illustrates how utterly impossible this is to achieve it. Well, in the way that people are telling you it's achievable,
Mm.
which is really what we started discovering when we were digging into it, that there how we think about poise and what poise actually is very different than what it takes to achieve that. And there's a whole bunch of different reframing that has to happen, and a bunch of different pathways to look at, from our physiology to the stories we're telling ourselves, etc. And yeah, so we've got a really juicy discussion about this stuff for you today.
So Julie, I want to dive in, and I want to give this to you because you've been doing a lot of research on this. The nervous system and our brain's response to discomfort and or negative stimulus, because I feel like the expectation of poise is that we don't let that affect us, or at least we don't let anyone see that we are effective. So this would be in moments of conflict, this would be in moments of uncertainty. What's happening in our brain?
In my research, we're talking purely about fight or flight response happening, and a lot of these difficult conversations, these interactions, these high stakes situations that we find ourselves in, whether those or interviews or feedback or whatever it is, those are things that stimulate us, and they stimulate our nervous system. And the very nature of them being so high stakes means that our body knows it's linked to survival in some way, shape, or form, like our financial survival, our career success. These aren't things that we're making up are important. These are things we know are important. But you have this competing thing of the way something hits your nervous system, and then this idea that I am not supposed to show in any way that I have been affected by this moment that has happened, other than to be really the essence of like corporate Barbie. So what ends up happening is, because we as a culture have a very complicated relationship with our emotions, we have a complicated relationship with showing vulnerability, we have a complicated relationship with feeling sensations in our bodies. These things have developed into, well, I really need to do the thing, but even the physical sensation of emotions in my body now actually cause me a little bit of panic, because do the thing or someone's going to see me sweat. Now I'm in an impossible situation. This happens in a lot of different ways in our culture. And what ends up happening is we do sort of like what I did when I was growing up, which is confuse complete shutdown for poise. Complete shutdown means, no, you're not seeing that I am experiencing a strong reaction to anything, because I'm not actually experiencing a strong reaction to anything. Emotions is emotions aren't they're just not the enemy. They have a very finite energetic cycle. They are meant to sense the world around us in order to bring information back that we then incorporate with our thinking brain in order to create not only the meaning of it, but also strategize of how to deal with it. But if you cut out that emotional range and just go straight to the nervous system, the nervous system's a bit of an asshole, really. Like, if you try and tell it what to do, it doesn't respond to commands. It does respond to negotiation, which we'll talk about a little bit when we're talking about tactics. But what this means is, an emotion only has a finite life if we feel it and let it go. If you ruminate or shut it down, it's like putting it in some sort of a time capsule, or like safe, or like cryogenic chamber, where it just lives in perpetuity. And that's what's going to end up starting to get confused and muddy and start to gain like angry momentum. I don't know. I mean, I kind of think of like Gollum was a cute little hobbit, and it couldn't get what it wanted, and it turned into, my precious. This is what happens to our emotions, which means that ultimately, for what we're trying to do to move through these things, going back to something we've said for years and years and years, is that your emotions are actually why people care about what you're saying. You really shoot yourself in the foot when you mistake shutdown for poise. So that's kind of a little bit of the nervous system background that has altered the way we're looking at it. Let's start off by first making sure we're not confusing shutdown for, what I think of as being like the eye of the hurricane.
Mm.
when it comes to feeling our feelings. So that, I mean, that's what I've been thinking about. And I know you've had some thoughts around that too, and I'd love to hear those as well.
Yeah, I think about the social piece of the puzzle because that I think is where the desire to be unflappable comes from.
There you go.
It comes from what we see held up as examples of competent and powerful women in media. It comes from the expectations that we see in the office. And this makes me think back to our very first group presentation in front of a huge corporation. When we asked people to experience sensation in their body, they freaked out. Like, the deer, you would have thought we'd ask them to kill puppies. And that was a moment, I think, for us back at the very beginning of Vital Voice training, of realizing just how far we had to go from, we're actors who are used to experiencing sensations in our body, and we're here to tell you that that's not a big deal, to like break down that barrier and get people to go on that journey with us. We were like, oh, we can't just tell them that it's okay, because it's so deeply ingrained that it's not okay. And so we've spent the 7 years since talking about emotions and somatic experiencing and feeling things in your body, and how not only is it not a bad thing, it's actually necessary to get to the place that you want to go. But it's still hard for a lot of people. And I think it's because of the examples that we have both in real life and in media. And with that, I would really like to get into kind of two of our favorite pop culture representatives of poise, who occupy, I would say, maybe opposite ends of the spectrum in at least a couple of areas. One of them being Janet, the benevolent, not a girl, kind of not a robot. We don't really know exactly what she is, from The Good Place, played by the absolutely phenomenal Darcy Carden. And the other one who actually showed up in that first presentation on a slide, Claire Underwood from House of Cards, who is played by Robin Wright. Janet being a representative of the kind of poise where you always know the right answer to any question, and who is, at least, well, especially in season 1, completely unflappable, but in that very like polite, pleasant way. And we were just talking about this because Darcy Carden as an actress is so naturally warm and so naturally charismatic in that way, that there's nothing cold about that character. And it's, this niceness is infused with humanity, which is a little bit of an ironic thing given the character that we're presented with being we're constantly reminded in the audience that she's not a girl. And then Claire Underwood on the opposite spectrum of this, who is a perfect example of the kind of poise that I think people want when they fetishize this idea of neutral calm, as in nothing makes me sweat. I am unflappable no matter what people throw at me. So with that as our like general framework, we've got Janet and we've got Claire. Where do we want to dive into that mess, Julie?
I want to dive in with Claire, because, you know, as you were talking about Janet, something to go back to, and that is Janet's existence is infinitely easier, in fact, because she doesn't have emotions to things. She can depend on programming that's been decided.
And she does have all the answers.
Have all the answers. So, I definitely want to dive into that because that's so interesting to me. But it's, as Casey mentioned in our very first presentation, we had this, well, we still sometimes bring it back for greatest hits good.
She comes back, yeah.
There was a slide when we were talking about people holding their breath when they're trying to suppress emotions, which was like our dipping in the toe into this whole thing. Claire Underwood standing in her power suit, no expression on her face, and the words read, "Everything is under control." And we were being a little tongue in cheek at that point, but what we've come to realize working with clients over the years is people want to be Claire Underwood. They want that kind of, you know, when Robin Wright Penn talks about her experience playing the role, she says things like, "I knew I was to be the star that others would orbit around." That was part of this. And it's interesting because there's kind of two pieces when you're talking about the social. There's a tremendous amount of privilege that she comes from that allows that to happen. But there's also, going back to this, everything's under control, when people see Claire Underwood and they see this example of somebody who still reads as a human, but clearly seems to have everything under control, it kind of messes with your brain. And this brings me back a little full circle in the story of becoming an actor, because the actress that plays Claire Underwood, Robin Wright, is incredibly in touch with her emotions, to the point that she can play them so expertly, like an instrument, that she's choosing what's going to show up in a moment. But that is different than the absence of emotion. And that is the essence of why we care about what is essentially kind of a terrible person. Because we can see a humanity in there. We can see pain. We can see vulnerability. We can see all those things that we're told we are never supposed to show. But that's what makes that character, I'm going to use the word likable, but let's just say that's not exactly the right word when we think about Claire Underwood. So that to me, I think is really fascinating. I know in my own experience, being so poised my whole life, it was really hard for me to get in touch with my emotions in an expressive way when I was in my MFA program, where that was the only goal. Julie, cry prettier.
Cry prettier. Oh God.
I don't know how.
Oh.
Yeah, that's what I think about Claire Underwood. And tossing that back to the differences between that and Janet. Well, and also if you've got thoughts about Claire, because I know you do.
Yeah, well, so talking about how we as an audience watching Robin Wright Penn play Claire can see underneath the hood a little bit, because she's such an incredible actress and she is so in tune with both her emotions and with the story and the emotion of the character. It just reminds me that we think we're hiding our emotions from other people, and rarely are we actually able to accomplish that, because all of us have a human bullshit meter. And
I thought you were going to kill me when you were doing your Southern Lady imitation.
well, and we'll get to this in a minute, but that's a tactic. That is a genuine tactic of like saying the lovely thing with the polite smile, but underneath that being like, I will freaking kill you. And that's also Claire Underwood. So you can't, like, it really comes down to, you cannot hide your emotions the way you think you can hide your emotions. It is actually impossible. But that's what we're told we have to do. So the ways that we go about accomplishing that, and this gets back specifically to this idea of neutral calm. And specifically when we were researching difficult conversations as we were preparing and writing our workbook for our course, Power Play, we kept coming back to these master classes and these books and these courses written by hostage negotiators on how to navigate difficult conversations. And I'm not saying that there's nothing valuable to be learned from these mostly men about how to approach difficult conversations. But I want to make a couple points when it comes to learning how to deal with difficult conversations from hostage negotiators. They exist in a world and are constantly stimulated in ways that most human beings do not ever experience. So you don't have the experience of literally negotiating a life and death situation, and therefore you don't have the experience that they have of dealing with emotions and high stakes situations. So there's that. And there's also the idea, and this came up when talking about this with my husband, which when I was talking about this with him, he's like, nobody wants to be managed the way a hostage negotiator manages a criminal taking hostages. So why are we looking to them as experts of how to approach difficult conversations? And it comes back to the idea of control. I feel like everybody wants to be more in control. And that's why we fetishize these things that are essentially not achievable. And just to button this, I want to go back to because we're going to talk a lot about calm, but I want to talk about neutral. The idea of remaining neutral within difficult situations, within stressful situations, comes back to the idea that if we are neutral, we will have the most access to our brains, to our thinking, logical brains, and we will be able to make decisions. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that. We all want that. We don't want to not have access to our brains. But the idea that neutral is achievable is complete bullshit. We are not neutral. Human beings are not neutral, either in how we are perceived by others and in how we ourselves perceive situations. Neutrality is an impossible goal. So what do we do with that advice?
I mean, first of all, the expectations, as we've been going into at some length, are impossible. And we also have to accept the very real truth, like death and taxes, control doesn't exist. The act of trying to control is making things infinitely worse. So I think if we start coming to it from that angle, we can start to figure out how we can meet a moment that's not so inflamed without having to resort to manipulative tactics with managing other people, with managing ourselves. Because ultimately, when we're talking about communication and leading and teams, this is interhuman context. Groups don't work if one person is in complete control trying to manage the entire rest of the team's reactions. And that's really another part of poise, trying to manage other people's reactions to you. It's not possible. And this is a lot, when we talk about power, what you can control, what you can't. Other people's reactions, you can't control. Now, since we still live in a world where their reactions could have a real impact on our lives, we are just going to leave it there. We're going to talk about other ways we can interact and breathe through things. But I think, Casey, that takes a little bit of talking about going back to the nervous system. This place I talked about, shutdown, which is really, I think if we're going to talk about it in nervous system terms, that's freeze. That is, I've shut off my prefrontal cortex. I am here. I am faking a painless death. Or if I play dead, they'll ignore me and move on. So that is what we fundamentally see when people try too hard to shut it down. But there's another one that might make people think that they're not in shutdown that also doesn't really serve you as well. I'm letting you reveal what that is.
And that is the idea of fawn, the idea of putting on manners, putting on poise, putting on pleasantness, putting on look how easy I am, and how I'm not going to rock the boat. I'm going to be very, and that's an interesting place, because I don't think fawn automatically puts you underneath other people in status, because it's a place of protection. It's a place of really, don't look at me, or if you do look at me, see me as something completely non-threatening. And as much as I don't want to frame leadership as you have to be threatening, being completely non-threatening makes you a non-entity. It makes you essentially automatically a follower. And so when we replace poise or perfect calm with, look how lovely and pleasant and easy I am, we're not in a place of being seen or perceived as a leader.
Oh God, so much of what you just said. We're not in a place of being perceived as a leader, and we're also almost void of our own purpose in the conversation.
Yes.
Because the thing is, if you really want to go through life invisibly and without offending anyone, be polite with nothing else underneath it. And everyone will talk about, I mean, I'm going to go back to what a nice young man, which, as we know how those stories really turn out. I watch a lot of murder documentaries, by the way. Those. So since fawn is the most rewarded behavior, especially for women, how do you start to kind of separate? Because again, like, fawn isn't because you're stupid and weak and feel yourself to be subservient and you know your place. It's a nervous system reaction that you have learned helps you through difficult moments, really, I think, up until the point that you become a leader, because the point of the leader in many ways is to absorb the difficult moments for their team. Yeah, go ahead.
This gets into the other side of neutral calm, which is calm. And I think we have to talk about the difference between being calm and not feeling anything. And this goes back again to shut down. But this is where people have a very unhelpful binary in their minds, which is either I am calm and feel nothing or feel only pleasant things, or I am in discomfort and I have lost because I am in discomfort and pain. And there is a world of space in between these where human beings exist, which is, okay, I can feel excited about something. I can feel not calm, but that excitement can be pleasant excitement, or it can be certainly a mix of pleasant and unpleasant excitement. This is where we're talking about how activated our nervous system is versus how calm our nervous system is, or unactivated our nervous system is. This is where I think we can go down the rabbit hole of neuroscience and polyvagal theory and all of that stuff. But I think to keep it really practical, knowing that your nervous system can be activated, i.e. not calm, but you still haven't lost, you haven't failed, means that you don't have to treat nervous system activation as a cause for fight and flight, as a cause to go down the rabbit hole of, I have to beat my way out of this, I have to run away, I have to be a very, very good girl, or I shut down completely and don't let them see anything. Those are not your only choices. As long as we acknowledge that a lack of calm is not the end of the world.
It's not your stop sign. It's not. And this goes back to what you started with at the beginning. Poise is how you react. And also in how we think about control. Because when we say you don't have control, we don't mean like lay down passive, it's all over, like let's get some violins out and like pretend we're on the Titanic. We use a different option. We cannot control if our nervous system gets activated. I cannot control if something makes me feel a certain way, if something triggers me a certain way. But I heard this and I thought it was so interesting. American culture links the experience of the emotion with the reaction in such a tight bind that we don't often see that there's a choice, that you can feel the thing and then choose a different action. Because we're not saying you have to show everyone actively how you're feeling. We're saying you need to feel it. And you can still make choices that are going to serve you. And I think that gets so much more to the point of what poise is supposed to be than please be, admin Barbie or CEO Barbie or whatever it is, like you said, is non-threatening. Because I think, and I'm just going to say this as well, one thing we haven't used is the word passion. Your passion is included in things that are highly stimulated to your body. So the more shutdown you have, you can't bring your passion, you can't bring your purpose, you can't bring why you do all these things. You're what's the term that people say, like that's super creepy and related to fascism? The ends justify the means. Your ends are not justifying your means.
So this brings up another pop culture reference for me, which is the hot mess. Because again, people associate the idea of feeling anything with a breakdown of every bit of control that they possibly have. And so therefore I have to show my whole mess all the time. And I think we get this both with characters who are just sort of always hot messes, which can be very fun and very charming on TV. And we can fall in love with them because we see the mess, but nobody wants to bring that to an office. Nobody wants to be that person in real life all the time. But then we also see the hyper competent woman leader who in her personal life is a hot mess. And that's what I call the Olivia Popeness of it all. So Olivia Pope, on Scandal, is this hyper competent, incredibly intelligent, get shit done. She is a boss bitch, white hat and all, riding in to save the day, never showing her cards, never letting people affect her except when the camera peers at her at a private moment and you see the emotion in her eyes. But then we see her go home and get out her like fishbowl size, wine on her perfect white couch with her perfect white sweater and fall apart. And I think people really believe that if they allow themselves to feel in the office, they're going to go full Olivia Pope on the couch. They're going to erupt. They're going to explode. And this is where we came up with the archetype of the volcano. So Julie, let's talk about the volcano.
Oh my God, because this is, you'll notice that Olivia Pope sitting, you mentioned the glass of wine. I feel like anytime you have a character who is given a glass of wine to hold, what they are trying to tell you is this world is too much for them. They're doing the best.
This glass of wine represents my emotions that I cannot feel in any other way.
The fuller it is, the emptier I am.
Oh God.
Which got me thinking about something that I think is familiar to a lot of people. We started this quiz, which we were really proud of. What's your work armor? To look at some of the different ways we've seen people adapt to their workplaces that haven't been the healthiest for who they want to be ultimately in the world. And one of those ones is the person that has shoved it all down for all of this time and then does feel like they're about to explode. Because at that point, you might.
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about the way we experience this energy. There's this, if you're going to keep it completely in control into yourself, you're just going to keep reflecting your emotions back in on yourself. Mm-hmm. In acting terms, we call that radiating inwards. And funny enough, something my movement teacher called me out on. She's like, I see it all. I see it like come to just here. And then it's like, and it goes back inside. And then you just kind of start to see whatever it's going to do all chemically in there, or it gets released. Mm. But if you've built up the pressure so much and you have yet to experience what it's like to feel your emotions, and the first time you're actually going to feel them is in the high pressure situation, because that's the limit of what you can contain in your body. Yeah, that's a scary proposition. There are so many steps before that happens. Yes. The same way there's so many steps before the quiet, very polite person becomes a complete asshole when they start. And these are not the inevitable conclusions. Mm-hmm. So the volcano is essentially, I am so built up that the only way things are going to get out is for me to explode. Now, the good news is on that is when we do actually explode, if you can do it in a situation that's sort of separate from that explosion's not all that big when you let it happen. And I can say this because I have tried to utilize that to play really big dramatic characters. And it was like, it's coming, it's pew. What movie is that where the little demon comes down? It's like, ugh, and then you realize it's only 2 inches tall.
Oh, it's a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode.
Yes, that's what it ultimately is.
Oh my gosh. It's the fear demon. It's the fear demon on the Halloween episode. And then they see the illustration in the book and they miss that it says actual size. It's a perfect metaphor for how our emotions actually act when we allow ourselves to feel them instead of trying to shove them down or gaslight ourselves into thinking that we don't feel them. I don't feel that. Everything's fine. I'm totally fine. Everything's totally fine. Or we gaslight other people. That's how we usually achieve this idea of neutral calm, is via self or other focused gaslighting. We're lying. We're straight up lying. We have to stop lying to ourselves if we want to get past this.
And trusting, if I feel like something came at me with a barb or something like that, what different conversations can we have with ourselves where it isn't, oh no, that didn't really happen, I'm just going to ignore it, or I'm going to annihilate that.
Yeah.
That's that territory that's so rich in between. That's where problems get solved. Yes. And minds get changed. But if we skip over that whole thing, I'm sorry, even if you're the most perfect person in the world, if that's all you're showing to your team, you're not an effective leader.
No. I want to sidebar, because it's interesting that it's a piece of poise, because I think sometimes it feels maybe a little off in left field from the emotions conversation, but it's not, because it's a huge source of emotional distress and discomfort, which is the idea of knowing all the answers as being a part of poise. I want to take us back there very purposefully, back to the idea of being Janet in your office. We just had a really interesting conversation with a woman where she told us that she was getting penalized for using upspeak at work. Upspeak being the rising inflection at the end of the sentence. And the general cultural narrative about upspeak is that it's a sign that you don't know what you're talking about, or that you're unsure of yourself. And that is one of the many, many ways that women may be undermining themselves at work or self-sabotaging. You can hopefully tell from my tone of voice how much I absolutely hate that bullshit narrative. But besides the fact that upspeak is a useful melody of speech, the advice that this woman was given was to eliminate upspeak, to always enter sentences on a down, and to be confident with what she was saying. But then she was penalized because they were like, but if you don't know what you're saying, then, don't just like pretend that you know what you're saying, but also always sound confident with what you're saying. Sound like you know the answer, but don't. So it's just one more double bind. And I think over the years, we have dealt with so many clients who expect themselves to know all the answers. And I don't think that expectation comes from nowhere. It comes from either being straight up told that they need to either always have the answer or look like they know that they have the answer, or intuiting that from what they're seeing in their culture. So what do we do with that expectation to be human Google?
What both of us have really discovered over the years is that it's not even like a consolation prize to say you are not Google, because you do something Google cannot, which is you synthesize. So if we could just accept in this moment in time, we are no longer humans that store actual information in our brain. We store pathways to get to information in our brain. I think we can extrapolate that to your expertise is how you solve problems and how you think through things, as opposed to how much you have in your own like Scrooge McDuck intellect vault up there that's accessible. And I don't feel like that should be a big deal to change this. Because when people say, I don't know, we talk about with them, but you know something. Yeah. Orient yourself to what you do know, the problem you're trying to solve, and you'll figure out how to get from A to B. And that to me that's magic. That's expertise to see that. So that's the first thing I think of when I think of someone like Janet. Is that's great to have a Janet there. Basically your Siri in your phone. Siri can access a ton of information, but you know what? If you ask Siri where to hide a dead body, she can't help you.
Well, the thing that just flashed into my mind as you were talking about that was the American education system does not set us up to appreciate pathways to knowledge as a style of knowledge and expertise. It does really only, at least until college, set us up to believe that knowing the correct answer, either from a small menu of choices, or by perfect recall of facts and data, as the only legitimized form of knowledge and form of intelligence, which is just so not how the world works. So that's just like a philosophical thing of like one of the many things we need to tackle about the American education system, that knowing how to retrieve information is just as important as knowing the information itself.
Weirdly, I almost say more so, because that goes like eating fish versus teaching fish, or whatever sort of
that metaphor. Yes.
Yeah, I honestly don't know why we're so fixated on fishing, but it'll do for the moment. And because I think the moment we release ourselves from the expectation to know everything at every moment, we do two things. We allow ourselves to back off from the fight or flight, because it's not, if I don't know the answer, my career is tanked, with the cognitive ability I have from this flash of nervous system, and also, oh my God, I can't think of anything I know in this moment. It allows you to take a step back from that. But again, like, I feel like it's such a different proposition because of the experience each of us brings to leadership roles, the personal experience, I used to think about it like this, but now I think about it like this experience. I guess the word I'm looking for is wisdom. You can't freaking Google wisdom.
Yeah.
You can Google wisdom. But you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. Well, I think you're making such an important point here that the human brain does not function like AI. It does not function like a machine. It functions like an artist, and that ability to make connections and to draw complex ideas together, and even to sort of conspiracy theory board a huge subject like we're doing right now. AI can't do that. Machines can't do that. Only human beings can do that. And that is a valuable thing in and of itself. I think what people are looking for, and maybe we can address this as we get into our sort of solutions part of the conversation, is what do I do when I don't have the answer? So what do we suggest that people do when they either can't recall the answer in the moment, when maybe the answer has nothing to do with what's been discussed previously and you've been thrown into left field and you don't know what's going on? How do we respond to those moments?
The first thing I propose is sometimes you just need a moment to take a breath. We do not need to be doing things at such a frenetic pace that we can't even allow like a length of pause that we would include in something like rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
We need to get acquainted with the power of a pause. So many of these things that people are like, oh my God, I don't know, I don't know. If you have them take a breath, like, oh yeah, it's this. And I experience that multiple times a day. Just sometimes I'll get through a sentence and I can't remember what it is. It'll come back to me seconds later. So like level one is that answer might just be there waiting for you to just take a breath and look at.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also level two of how we're dealing with those. So I will pass it back to you to talk about, other.
I think level two is, if you can't, even after taking a breath, come up with something, we have to learn how to stall with style.
Yes.
We have to learn how to, without feeling like we have to abase ourselves for not having, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I don't remember this. I'm so sorry. I will look at, to be able to say, I don't have that answer right now, but I'm going to go look it up and get back to you.
Yeah.
That's poise, not the perfection of being able to automatically get the right answer all the time, but being able to say, you can have confidence in my ability to get this to you at some point in time very soon. That is sexy poise.
It's that thing that we talk about being, anytime we're communicating, we're not just saying the words, which is what I feel like Google is parallel to. We're being the tour guide through your own mind and your own ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I'm a tour guide through San Francisco, I might take you, past a burned down building and say, I don't know how it burned down, but I know this used to be a house that contained like a family that played music or whatever piece of history. And this has all left us to this place where it now looks like this. I have given you a context. I have given you a way to relate to it. I have given you its value in the story. I might not know why that house burst into flame. And that is probably the least important detail in that. And that's what I think that we need to, again, get more comfortable doing. I don't know this, but what do I know? Well, the context is this. I know I'm an expert in this, and I know 5 other people that could do this, or this.
Mm-hmm.
Will those be things that will meet your needs for what we're trying to solve right now? Or is it something else you're looking for? Then we can get together and brainstorm a way to pursue the information. Because if we're leaders, yes, I don't want to interrupt you. You've got to thought, go.
No. What you've just elucidated, I think so beautifully, is that there's the individual answer, which is, I don't have that right now, but I will get it for you. And then there's the seeing the larger picture, zoom out answer of this, of like, okay, this is what I know. This is who knows another piece of this. This is what you know to bring to this. How do we synthesize all this information together? And both of those are gorgeous, legitimate answers that I think show incredible leadership skills.
Yes, absolutely. I agree, but it takes normalizing that I don't need to be the most perfect, shiny cog in a machine to be a very functional, very important part of this machine.
Absolutely. So coming back to this idea of pause and breath, to get to another solution for the issues that we're facing, what do we do with discomfort in the body? when we have a completely normal human response to somebody being an asshole, to a high stakes situation, to a potential source of conflict, when the body and the nervous system starts to get activated, how can we deal with it?
We talk about two choices, and I'll talk about choice number one because I think that's going to lead beautifully into choice number two as we are talking about all of this. So way to throw in a little bit of anticipation there. What we cannot control the original impulse, but as I said before, that doesn't mean that we can't control our reaction to things that are extremely stressful. One thing we can do when we start to feel that like heightened chemical, like for me, my giveaway is suddenly I'm very aware of my armpits, and they're all like woohoo, all the sweat glands. Like I can feel it and I know it's happening, and I realize, okay, that's my indicator. I am now getting into fight or flight. Because, as I evolve thinking about these things, I don't know that it's always so important to know the story we have attached to things to be able to navigate those things physiologically. I've really come to believe that the best thing you can do in that moment is to keep it into exactly what it is, which is a physiological process of our bodies interacting with their environment. I can now label, I feel a little tense right here. My armpits feel sweaty. Wow, I am squeezing my butt. Like I think I can make an engagement ring for myself. All of these different things, I can label them. And then I can say, in my one thing that my brain will be able to contain at that moment, I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to take a breath. The breathing tells your body it's not dying. The fight or flight tells your body to stop breathing, especially if you go into freeze, because that's how you play dead. You want to get some oxygen in there. It will both help your thinking brain and it makes your body go back to the place it's not dying. So that's a very concrete physiological step you can take. And then option two, which is a little bit more of a tactical approach.
This is where we get into one of the really, really fun, a little bit nerdy, artistic moments for us, which is the actor idea of objective, what I'm actually trying to do. And I'll preface this the way that we preface this when we talk about objective within a workshop scenario, which is the first question that actors usually get after, how do you memorize all those lines, is how do actors not get nervous on stage? And the answer is, we do get nervous on stage. Maybe not as much as the general population, maybe not as much in all scenarios, but let me tell you, I've been in some high stakes presentation situations and performance situations recently where I have felt very physically activated, very nervous system activated. So in addition to breathing, which is so fundamental, I'm also remembering what I'm there to do, what I'm there to accomplish, my what and my why. And this is where crafting that in advance, having that as a North Star, not as a do or die, but as a North Star, as a target, can help us give our brain something to focus other than on how we're doing. Because as soon as we start focusing on how we're doing, and that meets that nervous system activation or that little bit of discomfort, we're going to go down the stress cycle. We're going to go down the death spiral. It's not going to be fun anymore. So giving yourself that North Star to come back to can get you out of that dark spiral and back into creativity, back into problem solving, back into tour guiding people through your information. And this is why poise cannot be your objective. Your objective cannot be to be poised because it's not active. It is inherently not active. So manners cannot replace an objective. Likability cannot replace an objective, and neutral calm cannot replace an objective. Those are all ingredients of poise.
And proving your competency.
Proving yourself, proving that you belong in the room, proving that you are a leader. None of that can be your objective because it's just not effective. It goes back to that. It's survival based, or it's just too vague to be accomplished. It's not a real goal. Now, what we can do is play with some of this stuff as tactics, which are sort of the underpinnings of the objective. If the objective is the overarching what we're trying to do, tactics kind of come into how we're doing it. So that is a beautiful way to kind of full circle us back into Alabama beauty queens. And that as an example of politeness or manners as a tactic for getting what we're actually trying to do done. Southern women, and this is a stereotype. I'm just going to talk about the stereotype. Southern women are often very, very, very good at a clear objective of put someone in their place with the tactic of being just sweetness and light and manners personified. And that is the core of bless your heart, which underneath it has murder involved, but on top of it has the tactic of poise and deliciousness.
Fuck off and die cake frosted.
There are so many ways though that we can use this. Like, it's not just Southern beauty queen. I think that's maybe a negative example that we're giving, but that the ability to do manners, to do etiquette, it's a tool. There's nothing wrong with that stuff inherently if we see it as one tool in a toolbox and not the substitute for our personality.
And this is something I think is going to take a little bit more exploration, is when did this idea of hitting all your markers of manners become something that could replace actually showing up in a space and participating?
Yes. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is that there are legitimate punishments for people who show emotions at work.
I totally agree.
Especially if you're outside of that mythic norm of white, cisgender, male, straight, able-bodied, educated.
Yeah. So we're talking about slowly but surely, I wouldn't say so much inventing something new, is trying to build momentum for an alternative to that. Yeah. The more people we can get to understand that this is the process of how things actually work, from create the vocabulary for things you can't control. I think that does as we've always tried to do, which is create options that if you can meet that with your own self-analysis and core values, you plus that equals amazingness. And I will say we aren't going to promise that this is not going to have moments of discomfort, but we need to change our relationship with discomfort.
Yes.
Discomfort won't kill us. Discomfort, awkwardness, I've hurt somebody's feelings. These are all manageable things. These aren't like they're done and you never have a chance to do anything about them.
Yeah.
We just need to stop being so uncomfortable around being uncomfortable.
And that takes practice.
Yeah.
That really does. That takes both the intellectual reframing and the cultural reframing and the personal experience. And this is where, I think getting into this, like putting the stake in the ground of discomfort is not a stop sign. And we can make strategic choices every day to lean into a little bit of discomfort, to feel sensation in the body, to not cut ourselves off at the neck and pretend that our brain is the only thing that we bring to an interaction. We can do that in small daily steps. And that is, it's the only way that it changes on both an individual level and a cultural level.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And this kind of takes it to where we can wrap up in some of our takeaways, that emotional hijack, which is where we really get so far into fight or flight that our prefrontal cortex and thinking brain shuts down. It's a Daniel Goleman term, isn't inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
When we learn how to interact with stress, when it's, a smaller, when it's what would baby Audrey too from Little Shop of
Yes. Yes.
Like, feed me some more. I think we have a better opportunity for the botanicals of our lives.
Well, and you brought up something earlier that I think is a beautiful preview to what we're going to talk about next week, which is power and the idea of giving ourselves options and choices to make. Because in uncontrollable circumstances, when we acknowledge that perfect control is impossible, it's not a goal, it's not serving us anymore, we do still need something that we can grab along, so that we're not just a feather blowing in the wind. And a couple of those things that we brought up today are, breathing, are taking space, are remembering what you do know, and then what Julie very briefly mentioned just a couple of minutes ago were core values. Determining what your core values are and what you bring to the table that's different from what other people in this room bring to the table. When we have that self-knowledge in place, we can start to make choices that suit our given circumstances. And we can start to feel like we have a little more power, not control, not ultimate power, not blast everything away in favor of what I want and need power, but a little bit more power that helps us to show up as the leaders we are.
Showing up. How do we show up? And we're not saying this is easy.
No.
We're genuinely not. We're saying that we are on this path because we see glimmers of hope and light in solutions that could be just healthier for all of us across the board. But this is a conversation. This, we want to bring our expertise. We also want to participate in the conversation with you all. So as you have questions or as you have stories you want to share, please do, like, bring it. This is the room where we're hoping it's all going to happen.
Yes. Well, and the room where we know it's all going to happen, just to bring it home, is we're bringing back our course again, starting on February 5th. Enrollment is open right now for the third cohort of Power Play Beyond Executive Presence, which is our small, intimate, live via Zoom group course that is breaking down all of this stuff, everything around executive presence, how you speak, how you move, how you share space and energy with others, how you bring the you-ness of you and help it shine in the world. And we love it so much, right, Julie?
It is not a marketing thing to say this is one of the true joys of our life, to have not only created it, but now having gone through 2 cohorts of it, it is impacting people.
Yes.
We're getting to see people that we are just so excited to hear about the kinds of opportunities coming to them. And the opportunities are great. And we're obviously very happy for that. But for us, it's just getting to see those moments of transformation where somebody steps into their power. And it's a really special program. And if it sounds like something you feel drawn to, check it out, talk to us. This is the only time this year we're going to be doing this 10-week version of it. So reach out. We love it. We want to talk to you.
Well, and one more opportunity to come and hang out with us, because this is a perfect sneak peek, both to what we're going to talk about next week in our episode, but also what we do in the course. And let us reassure you that we do not believe in webinar and commercials thinly disguised as webinars. We're doing what we call the power audit. Twice this month. It's going to be on January 20th, which is a Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. And we're doing it on Tuesday, the 25th of January at noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. East Coast time. We would love to see you there. It's 90 minutes. We will give you tools to think about how powerful you can be and how you can show up within your given circumstances, how you can determine what you can control and what you can't. We'll be working on some physical exercises, some emotional and social discussion. You will meet lots of cool people. It's a lot of fun, and we would love to see you there.
Love to see you there. And as Casey was mentioning, it's a really big, strong core value of ours, because of who we are, to not throw you in the deep end and blame you for not knowing how to swim. So for those of you who are a little more shy or feeling awkward, or is this for me? It is absolutely for you. We will handle you with such great care, and we welcome you into the space.
Absolutely. So next week, we will be back once more to talk about the third and the final piece of executive presence, which is power. We hope you'll join us then. If you missed the polished episode, we're going to link it in the description. And we can't wait to continue this conversation with you. Hopefully, if you've taken nothing else away from listening to this, you can tell how much we geek out about this stuff and how much we love the work that we do. Thank you so much for being a part of our audience, and we will see you next week.
Voice is produced and edited by us, Casey Aaron Clark
and Julie Fogg. Our theme song from this point on is from Softkill.
If you'd like to learn more about Vital Voice Training and all the different ways that we work with both individuals and organizations, you can find everything you need to know on our website, vitalvoicetraining.com.
You can also follow us on Twitter at @vital_voice and on Instagram at Vital Voice Training. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we would love for you to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And remember,
your voice, your body, and your ideas deserve to take up space in the world.